All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to try something a little ambitious. Tackle over 200 years of U.S. history by looking at the 45 people who've held the top job. This is going to be a whirlwind tour of the American presidency, so let's just dive right in.
And we're going to start with a soundbite that pretty much everybody recognizes, right? A moment of pure political drama that had the entire world glued to their TVs. It's a pretty stark reminder of just how messy the presidency can get.
And that really begs the question, doesn't it? How did we get from the philosophical founding fathers to this? The journey of the presidency is, well, it's a wild one. It's filled with brilliant leaders, tragic figures, and honestly, some truly bizarre characters. So let's go back to the very beginning and see how this all played out.
So our story has to begin with the men who literally invented the job. These guys were thinkers, they were generals, they laid the foundation for the whole country. But they were also incredibly complex men, just full of contradiction.
I mean, just look at this comparison. It reveals this incredible contrast right at the heart of the whole project. You've got John Adams, a lifelong abolitionist who never owned a single slave, and then you have Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote those immortal words, "All men are created equal," while owning over 600 people. The irony is just staggering. And get this for a twist of fate. They both died on the exact same day, July 4th, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. You can't make this stuff up.
And the other early leaders all left their own unique mark. Of course, there's George Washington, the mastermind general, who basically set the template for the job. Then there was James Madison, America's smallest president at just 5'4", who had to watch the British burn down the White House. And we can't forget James Monroe, who laid down his famous Monroe Doctrine, which basically told Europe, hey, stay out of our hemisphere.
Okay, so the next era was all about rapid growth, serious growing pains, and the start of some really deep divisions in the country. This is when the nation's borders just exploded outward, but it's also where the seeds of a massive future conflict were planted.
You know, this period was this weird mix of the kind of trivial and the truly tragic. In 1825, you have John Quincy Adams making news just for wearing long trousers at his inauguration. But then, just 5 years later, things take a much darker turn with Andrew Jackson signing the Indian Removal Act, a really brutal policy. And by 1837, the country finally gets its first president, Martin Van Buren, who was actually born an American citizen, not a British subject.
32. That's it. That is the number of days William Henry Harrison was president. He gave the longest inaugural address in history. We're talking nearly 2 hours, in a freezing rainstorm, caught pneumonia, and was dead just over a month later. Still the shortest presidency on record.
And then you get a guy like James K. Polk. People described him as super serious, no sense of humor. He even banned liquor from the White House. But this supposedly boring president, he provoked a war with Mexico and ended up expanding U.S. territory by a massive 1/3. He completely reshaped the continent.
This period also gave us some presidents who, well, let's just say they're often seen as placeholders while the country was spiraling toward a crisis. You have Millard Fillmore, whose own official biography calls him uninspiring. And then there's James Buchanan, who's probably remembered more for being the only president who never married than for how he handled the tensions that were about to tear the country apart.
You know, the highest office in the land is a lightning rod for conflict. So now we're going to look at the moments when the presidency was shaken right to its core by assassination, by scandal, and even by the threat of being removed from office. 4. Just think about that number for a second. That is how many American presidents have been assassinated while in office. It's a really grim statistic that just highlights how dangerous this job can be. The first, of course, was Abraham Lincoln, killed right as the Civil War was ending. Then there was James A. Garfield, and his story is wild. He probably would have survived the gunshot, but he died because his doctors were probing the wound with unsterilized fingers. After that, William McKinley was killed by an anarchist, and finally, John F. Kennedy, whose shocking assassination was broadcast to the entire world. And it's not just violence. Scandal has also defined the office. And of course, the big one is Watergate. Richard Nixon's administration got caught orchestrating a break-in and illegal spying. The cover-up that followed, which was revealed by his own secret recordings, ultimately forced him to become the only president in history to resign. Okay, now we're jumping into the 20th century, and this is an era of just incredible rapid change. Presidents suddenly had to deal with 2 world wars, the dawn of the atomic age, and the rise of mass media. The job completely changed.
And on a slightly lighter note, the era had some literally larger-than-life figures. You had Grover Big Steve Cleveland tipping the scales at 275 pounds, but the champion was William Howard Taft at over 330. Taft was also the first president to really embrace technology, completely getting rid of the White House horse-drawn carriages for a fleet of cars.
The turn of the century was just full of these fascinating characters. You had Theodore Roosevelt, who became the youngest president ever at just 42. Woodrow Wilson is still the only president to have earned a PhD. Then there's Benjamin Harrison, who had electricity installed in the White House but was so scared of getting shocked, he made his staff turn the lights on and off. And you gotta love Calvin Coolidge, nicknamed Silent Cal, who was famous for being a man of few words and for his belief that the best government does as little as possible.
But then you get to the middle of the 20th century, and things get very serious. The era was really dominated by three titans. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who served an unheard-of 4 terms, guiding the nation through the Great Depression and World War II. His successor, Harry Truman, made the world-altering decision to use the atomic bomb. And then Dwight D. Eisenhower, the war hero president, who established NASA and officially kicked off the space race.
But you know, when you talk about the most unpredictable path to the White House, you have to talk about Ronald Reagan. I mean, the guy was in 53 movies over 3 decades before he ever ran for a major office. His journey from a Hollywood set to the Oval Office was just unlike anything we'd ever seen.
And here we are. We've reached the final sprint, the presidents who have shaped our modern political world. This is a quick look at the last few decades and the path that got us to where we are right now.
So our modern era really kicks off with Bill Clinton, who we started with, a president defined by a booming economy but also by personal scandal. He was followed by George W. Bush, whose presidency was completely redefined by 9/11 and the long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Then came Barack Obama, the nation's first African-American president, who oversaw the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. And he was succeeded by Donald Trump, a real estate mogul whose business background and populist appeal just completely rewrote the political rulebook.
Which brings us to today. After this long, complicated line of controversial and complex figures, the presidency just keeps evolving. And while President Joe Biden is often noted for these simple, humanizing details like his love for chocolate chip ice cream, his presidency, like all the ones before it, is ultimately being defined by the immense challenges of our time.
So we've gone from mastermind generals to Hollywood actors, from quiet intellectuals to bombastic TV stars. It's an incredible spectrum of personalities, and each one tells you something about their era. Which really leaves us with one final thought. What does this long, strange, and fascinating history of the presidency really tell us about America itself?